Hi, I'm Rob Moores and welcome to the latest edition of the Leadership Untitled podcast. This is the show that helps to bring together hints and tips from experts in the worlds of coaching and leadership and learning development, hopefully to help you as a leader to develop yourselves, but also so hopefully you don't make some of the mistakes that we can share with you that we've made in the past. My guest this week is Cathy Hoy. Now, Cathy is the CEO of CLO100, which is a new development programme specifically targeted at senior L&D leaders, which I particularly love the idea about, the fact that it treats them first and foremost as leaders, rather than the learning aspect. Of course, that's a big part of it, but actually being able to reflect on the fact that we are leaders first and foremost, and all the things that come along with that, is really, really important. So what a great conversation. I cannot wait for you to listen to it, and please let me know what you take from it as well. So please join me in welcoming Cathy to the show. Hi Cathy, welcome to the Leadership Untitled podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, yeah, good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I guess I should start off with an apology. With all this lovely sunshine outside, I'm cooping you up inside your house for an hour to talk when we're in the middle of like the best weather we've had for about 8 months. But thank you for joining me as well. It's a pleasure. I like to start just to kind of say what it is or why it is I've reached out to people to come onto the podcast. And for yourself, obviously, we met virtually ages ago now when you joined the LPI. And, you know, from that moment on, I think we just kept on having conversations about all sorts of things, sort of learning, collaborations. And then obviously you're going to be moving on now to your new venture, which I'm going to let you talk about shortly. And we're talking again about all those wonderful things. And I just think it's amazing the sort of energy and passion you've got behind actually focusing on leaders of learning, and not just in the kind of mentioning no names and no company names or anything like that, and kind of a sort of a grayer, older worldy, theoretical type of approach to people. It's a really engaging one, and I'm already seeing lots of good things coming out about the program as well. So I can't wait to get into the nuts and bolts of that. But at the heart of that and all those conversations has been you and your passion and natural passion for it. So it was a no-brainer for me that I wanted you to come along and onto the episode. So I guess, first things first, tell me about what's got you to where you are today, kind of a potted history of Cathy Hoy to where we are today.
Gosh, great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, so I mean, my experience has all been learning and development, really, from about the age of 20, actually, in different roles, whether it be a kind of part-time thing when you first get into L&D. For me, that started back in retail. And then, I spent about 23, between 4 years now in learning, always within kind of, specific learning roles, never generalist HR. And that was actually always really important to me because that's what I always had a passion for. And I've just been really lucky to have worked for some really great brands as well. Organizations like Tesco, which I learned so much from sort of in the earlier days. More kind of bespoke organizations and boutique companies like the White Company, are completely different experiences. And then, to move on to heading up L&D teams in places like Expedia, CocaCola, Soho House. Really good experiences, really different industries. And so you learn so much from every different role you go into naturally. But when you also go into a different industry every time, it's kind of mind-blowing, really. And you have to kind of really think about how you reposition learning in that organization and what's going to really resonate with that organization. So, you go to Coke, and I worked within the commercial function of Coke, and you can't really go into that sort of organization evangelizing about the latest leadership development frameworks and methodologies, because they just look at you and say, and how are you going to add to our bottom line? So, you start to sort of change how you work and how you think. And I've just loved all of it, really. I ran a business previously for about 4 years as well, just before COVID, which was really good fun. Loved that. And then I had as you mentioned, at the beginning, a sort of a stint with the Learning and Performance Institute as well for probably about 18 months, nearly 2 years, which again was a completely different experience, but also really enjoyable.
Love it. I mean, so I guess, in summary, loads of small brands that no one's really heard of.
Absolutely, yeah. So the really tiny ones,
Yeah, Tesco, Coke, who are they?
Yeah.
Go back. I think you've got my I got my Peter Kay head on and going. Really, it's not about Coke. It's about Roller Cola and Panda Cola.
Yeah,
Those sort of things. Who works for those companies? That's what I want to know.
yeah. Panda Cola all the way. Yeah, definitely.
Other brands of Coca-Cola are available. Other brands of Coke are available. Coca-Cola, what a bad idea
Yeah.
that was. So I think combining those kind of two loves of mine there is crucial. That learning and development and leadership, and also that real focus on L&D, because I've noticed certainly on my journey over the last 20 odd years is that it tends to, you mentioned that kind of general HR piece, it tends to fall into that a lot, but there's never anything then very unique and specific allocated to it. It kind of gets lost in that. And I'll put my hand up and kind of go from an L&D point of view. My passion was around the learning and the leadership and the coaching pieces in that. I never really wanted to get into that position where I was suddenly going to be a head of talent, for example, that suddenly was like looking after recruitment and comms as well, because my passion is around the learning, the leadership, and the coaching. And quite often, learning leaders do kind of get swept into that HR route. So tell me about what it is that you're setting up now, and how that came about, and what it looks like.
Yeah, well, I suppose, gosh, so it came about through a number of things, really. I think for me, it's just a lack of anything that existed at this sort of level. So, talking to people that essentially they're accountable for the learning and development strategy in their organization, but actually that role, having done it a couple of times, it can be quite lonely. And I find it's probably even lonelier in the bigger companies, because you really want someone that you can talk to about some of the challenges you've got, and often that might be your peer or colleague in HR, but also they're still your customer as well. They're your internal customer. So there's only so much you can really, I guess, talk to people about internally. And there's also, I think, a pressure in that role that people in the organization think that you must know everything, and obviously none of us do. I certainly don't. And I think it can be quite intimidating. So the fact that there was a lack of any sort of structured development program for people at that level, so they could continue their career in L&D, but at that senior kind of level, that was a big motivator. The other, I think, for me as well, and I'm a massive fan of CIPD, and I think that everything they do is great. And I know so many people that have been thrilled going through their CIPD qualifications, and I think it's a lot of work involved, and it's admirable. But for me, again, CIPD felt a little bit too generalist, and I wanted something that focused just on learning. So learning and leadership within learning were really important to me. So yeah, ultimately it was the fact that there just wasn't anything there, and I felt, having done the role for so long, it would be nice to be part of a big professional senior community, but also go on that development journey with them in a cohort, and because you're going to really get to know people in that sort of space of time. 12 months is a long time to be part of a cohort, and I think the benefits that come out of that will be numerous, but from a networking perspective, it'll be great.
Yeah, I think that what you've mentioned there, that networking and the stakeholders that people have in their organizations, there is that pressure. I speak to so many learning leaders, and I think, like a lot of leaders, that were those words, imposter syndrome, come out sometimes, and the pressures of having to be right and having to know everything and having all the knowledge. But that kind of coming together, those communities, suddenly realizing that most of you feel the same way,
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
massive.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and sometimes I think, for me, the imposter syndrome thing, actually, I would question is really a thing. I think imposter syndrome almost makes it sound like there's a problem with the individual, and I think actually the problem is the environment that you're in that doesn't make you feel comfortable or make you feel able to share your concerns, or your level of confidence or whatever. So again, that's something I'm hoping we can help with as well during the program, to create that right environment for people.
That's spot on. I always say to people who talk about it, the first things, and no one's come along and injected you with imposter syndrome. It's not an actual disease, and it means something different to everybody. So what are the actual things you're going through? And I think you're spot on. Quite often, it almost exclusively, it's something to do with the culture, people making you feel like that, maybe. And I know, I guess, kind of going back to kind of theory that you shouldn't let anyone make you feel something, but it's very difficult not to in those circles. Even if it's stakeholders that you trust, if you maybe put the blockers up on something they want because you're trying to get to a point that you think is the right path, they can easily then circumnavigate you and go back to the generalist HR or people leader that kind of may come back and say, just do it, or just do it that way, or whatever it might be. So it is very difficult, and having that network. So, the program then, and I think we should call out the CLO100. So the program is mostly built around those sort of networking events and getting people talking to each other, then, is it?
So there's certainly a lot of that, yeah. So it's predominantly a virtual program, so lots of virtual workshops, things like Grill the Expert sessions, insight sessions, but there's also 2 in-person face-to-face events over the year as well. And for me, that was really important because I think you can only do so much virtually. Whilst it's great to have that opportunity to maybe mix with smaller groups within the cohort on a regular basis, and we'll have the digital platform where people can communicate and share ideas and things. But for me, having that face-to-face opportunity and it being overnight as well means people will get to socialize as well a bit with each other, and I think that's really important when you're building a network, whether it's a personal network or a professional one, actually. So yeah, it's definitely a big element of that. Yeah,
definitely. After a few beers, everyone will start telling the truth.
yeah, that's a good way of saying it, yeah.
Love it. I like to simplify these things. Not everyone's going to drink, obviously. So from a leadership point of view, you mentioned them as L&D, but also leaders in their own right. Then, so leadership, and also I like to put in there coaching, because I know coaching's part of the program as well. What is it specifically around that kind of leadership and coaching piece? Why that? And I asked that because it's rare that you get that still. In the programs that I've been part of, or that I've actually taken myself, you might sometimes be allocated someone who's called a coach if you're lucky. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're receiving coaching. It's kind of more of a kind of programmatic and scheduled kind of coaching. So what is it that you're trying to do from a pure kind of leadership and coaching point of view with these people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So from a leadership perspective, I think if I take myself back to, when you're in the role of a chief learning officer or L&D director or whatever the title might be, essentially the person accountable for learning in your business, when you first, go to a board meeting or you're first with the exec, and you suddenly have this realization that as well as knowing what you need to know about learning, you have to know about strategy, you have to know about marketing, you almost have to know a bit about everything that everyone else is there in the room that knows about. You've got the marketing director, well, they're going to focus on knowing about marketing. Well, I still need to know about marketing learning. You've got the legal director, great, well, do they know about protecting us legally, the organization? Well, I still need to know what's really important to make sure that I'm factoring that into behavior change in the organization and what people need to be upskilled on. I need to know about things like commercial awareness, strategic thinking, and you kind of forget that actually that person in that role in L&D, they don't automatically know all this stuff. Get granted, a lot of us learn on the job, and I think that, by the way, is always really important, and most of my learning, I suspect, has come from absolutely is on the job stuff, and basically being thrown into situations that you then have to just deal with, as I'm sure is a case for all of us. But you sometimes forget. You sometimes forget, actually, God, I might have taken or even produced a leadership development program that takes a lot of our execs through strategic thinking, but actually I need to know about this as well if I'm going to move up in my career and I'm going to operate at that level. And so for me, it was very much about making sure that learning leaders have got these executive level leadership skills like anybody else would have in an organization. I don't want L&D leaders to be left out, because there also might come a time in your career when you want to move into something else at that senior level. Actually, often when you look at different organizations, you look at retail, for argument's sake, as an industry, and actually who will take over the CEO, that's often internal. I mean, not always, it's often internal. It's someone that's maybe grown through the retail channel. It could be somebody from marketing. I've seen it happen from legal before. You never really hear of the L&D director suddenly becoming CEO the next year. So actually, why is that? Why are sort of L&D, even HR, actually to that extent, why are they not then being able to move up into that position? Well, is it because we're not focusing on these really big skills that we need? So from a leadership perspective, it's very much about that, and equipping people with what I think they need for the future of their career as well as right now. And the coaching is, for me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, we're talking about big topics here. So, one of our topics, for example, and we've got about 6, and we spend roughly 2 months covering each over the year. So if I take the first one, which is around business alignment, so we spent 2 months on business alignment. You've got workshops like commercial awareness, like strategic thinking, like business partnership, all of those really important things. But that is a lot over 2 months to learn. There's numerous other activities as well. And really the coach is there. It's a success coach that everyone's allocated their own personal success coach. And that's really to help you make sense of what you've learned in that 2 months and how to practically apply it back to the workplace so that you can make real change in your organization, not just sit through a program and go, well, that was great, what's next? And so I think that coach's role is absolutely vital in this program.
I think, I think it's important to kind of call out right at this moment something that I've said, the L&D leaders, learning leaders, they have the best intent when it comes to this stuff. And I've seen so many of them go away onto programs or, learning days, events, whatever it might be, big seminars, across the Atlantic, go to American and motivational speakers on the subject, all that sort of stuff, come back and full of ideas, and then dies out very, very quickly. Very quickly. And I think the 2 things you've mentioned there, that just ability to actually, if I kind of wrap up what you said in the first part of that, is it's almost you treat L&D as a separate business. Treat it as your business, not just you're just a little bit of someone else's business. How are you going to market that? How are you going to put the PR in there? There's an exercise I tend to run with a lot of people outside of L&D as much as within L&D, but do you actually really have a handle on what it is exactly that you guys do, how long those things take, and have you advertised that in a very clear and concise way to everyone else? Because on the whole, when someone goes and makes an e-learning that lasts 5 minutes, people think it takes you about no more than 10 to have done it. People don't have any idea or appreciation on what that is. So I think that leadership skill is crucial, and as you say, has often been missing. So now that marketing piece, I think, is crucial. So tell me a bit more about that side of things, really. So from an L&D point of view, how should we be marketing what we do more?
Brilliant question, and probably one of my most favorite topics actually in learning is marketing learning. I've been working with organizations probably on and off for about 6-7 years now in marketing learning. I love that space. It's so important when we think about how people learn, and I know you and I were having a conversation earlier about, also you've got the element of how people learn, but you've also got, the knowledge of how people forget very quickly as well. And I think there's also, one of the massive parts of that is getting people in the right state for learning, before any kind of learning intervention takes place, because the last thing you want, in a kind of an L&D role, particularly if you're a trainer facilitator, is people turning up, and when you ask the group, so what's brought you here today, that they say, oh, my manager sent me. That is the last thing any of us want to hear. And we know that we've got to do so much work to that person's state right there and then in the classroom or the virtual space, wherever we're in, to get them to really open up to learning. And so more of that we can do beforehand, the better. And that means a really strong engagement campaign. We want, targeted messaging. So what's in it for me as Cathy, not just what's in it for me as any old employee in this organization. What do I get out of this? What am I going to expect to learn? You need to be having those conversations with your manager as well, so that they're supportive, they're part of that journey, they're asking you what you want to get out of it, and they're helping you to measure whether you get that at the end of it. There's so much involved, and I think even things like coming down to your visual brand, your logos, your color schemes. Do you stand out, or are you just another bit of noise in your organization? It's, for me, marketing learning is absolutely huge, and it doesn't stop there with learners before a program or initiative. It's actually going on afterwards as well to look at, well, how do you market the value and the impact you're adding to the organization? What data are we sharing, and actually, is it meaningful? We all know now, I would hope, we don't want to be sharing things like bums on seats with, the board or the exec level. But actually, what data can you demonstrate? What change have you made, and how are you measuring that? And how Does it make the business move faster or more efficiently? And that to me all wraps up into, you know, how we market ourselves as a function.
Yeah, in a way that people understand, because you know you use that. Well, you know, look at some of the companies that you've spoken about working for. You look at Coca-Cola in terms of marketing. You know, they don't market to us all the kind of inner engineerings of a can of Coke. They market us the need for drinking a can of Coke, and hopefully market the fact that we're going to go and stand in front of a fridge and choose that one. And you know, that sort of stuff is massively important. You know, is this thing that's coming out on the TV around the business, is this a piece of comms? Is it from L&D? What am I supposed to do with it? If I was to say what helped me to actually achieve what I've achieved, do I know that's something that came from the learning team, or don't I know that? I've no idea. One thing interesting that you said that that old quote of my manager sent me. I've actually, as a trainer, and kind of like, I'm going to draw the line really thickly for a second. I know it's much more blurry than this, to kind of go, I dreaded that. Yeah, my manager sent me, right, you don't want to be here. We're going to have a right fun week. Brilliant. Here we go. Let's crack on. Whereas as a coach now, I actually love that answer. Don't get me wrong, I prefer it not to be the answer still. But if that comes up, I think it's that's really interesting. And you can delve into so much. And going back to your earlier point, what is there about the relationship and the culture or the dynamic or whatever it is that someone just sends you on something and you don't know why? Is it because they don't tell you? Is it because you daren't ask? Is it what's going on there? And that normally is such a fantastic conversation. I would imagine, again, I've given those success coaches to the leaders that are coming on the program. There might be one or two that might go, well, actually, it's not so much as black and white as I've been sent on it, but to a certain degree, I don't quite know what I'm doing.
Potentially, I would. I mean, yeah. Do you know what? There's always a chance, right? There is always a chance someone might feel like that. I would like to think that we are also leading by example with this entire learning experience for people. And for me, you know, the marketing initiatives, the engagement, even once people have signed up, you know, keeping in touch with those people and keeping them warm, essentially, before the program really kicks off, is just as important to me as their experience when the program has started. So I would like to think that that won't be the case, but I mean, look, you never know. But then that's, you know, we're going to have some coaches to help us with that. But you know, we're also, there's I think for me, one of the most important parts of the program, which might help us get over this, is the personalized onboarding for everybody. So a real bespoke onboarding session where we get to find out essentially the challenges in the organization, those individuals' development needs, their expectations for the program, all of that stuff, which helps us actually tailor a slightly more bespoke experience for everybody.
Love that. So you're getting a real kind of contextual feel for them and their environment, their business before they're coming into it. And you know, I think that continual comms is important. It made me think of a conversation that my wife and I were having last night. We went to the Lowry to watch a comedian, a guy called Tom Stade. If you've ever heard of him, he's like brilliant comedian. And we just said, like, big massive rush to actually get in the car and go. We hadn't really thought about going. We said on the way, you know what, we're going to blink and we're going to be driving home. It's like, it's one of those moments. And we did. On the way home, we went, right, we're here now again. Did that just happen? Were we there? And that piece that you've just kind of talked about, that keeping them warm, that kind of engagement beforehand about it coming up, generates that more excitement to actually think about it, to actually put yourself in the mindset of doing that and what you want from it. I personally felt, and this is more kind of a luck than judgment piece, I guess, that I did my CIPD a course, a level 7. I finished it a couple of years ago. So with the best part of 20 years experience behind me, I was able to bring so much into it to challenge it as much as it challenged me. I mean, I got a lot from the content, but I could also go, no, in the real world where I've worked, that no, you'd just get shouted at, or that'd say no, or it was brilliant to be able to do that sort of stuff. And I think, you know, the more time you give people to actually consider those things before they come into the program proper,
yes,
then the more value they're going to get from it, because they don't have to sit there for a day going, right, let me think about what my challenges are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And also, you know, for us, it's kind of twofold because, well, for us and them, it's twofold because the more we know up front about what somebody needs, whether it's them as an individual or whether it's their organization, the better we can help them achieve that throughout the year, so that when it comes to looking at did we achieve what we needed to for you, you know, have we together worked to ensure that X, Y, and Z have been ticked off for you, that we've achieved whatever transformational change you're looking at, or that we're at least well on our way in that journey to helping you do it. Because without those conversations up front, I'm not sure how we would properly evaluate, you know, the impact of the program on that individual and their organization.
And I suppose it could flag in certain circumstances that maybe I don't know the organisation as well as I need to.
Yes, we're already seeing that actually. We are already seeing that with a few people, which has been really interesting. And in fact, they've actually really loved the questions because it's made them go, shall we catch up next month? I need a bit of time to think about this. And that's great as well, because you know what? If they don't get anything else out of the next 12 months, which they will, then they've already got that, you know, which has actually made them think really differently about what they know, what they don't know, should they know it, that sort of thing. And we're actually also very lucky with some of our program contributors, and one of which is Jim Kirkpatrick, who's actually, you know, really helping us as well look at how we can properly measure the impact of the program throughout the duration. Laura Overton as well, she's going to be helping us by running reflection sessions on a regular basis. And for me, reflection is almost probably more important than the kind of more formal learning piece. You know, it's actually, what did you take from that? What are you going to do differently? How have you thought about that now, having it be, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks after that sort of, you know, learning? And that for me is really, really important. And then we're also working with Matthew Syed Consultancy to do some kind of pre-mortem, so to really work out, you know, what people want at the end of the program, but essentially what would bad look like, and let's work back and let's actually identify where accountability sits then to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think all of these things will hopefully, you know, kind of come together and give us some really good impactful data at the end of the program, and where we can really demonstrate that actually we've helped individuals and organizations.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, all of that really stood out for me there, but I think the thing that stood out the most is the reflection sessions, because so many people don't build those things into programs, and they just rely and hope that it will happen naturally for people to go away and reflect. And even with the best intent, people then may not have the time to. But again, as a coach, I go, you might get people that actually go, I've got those reflection sessions, so I need to think about this sort of stuff before I go to it. Or they get to it and go, I've not done anything with it. And that, and again, as a coach, and I'm sure Laura Overton will be thinking exactly the same thing. If you get those people coming, I've just not had the time to do any of that stuff. Well, there's the subject we need to crack then. Let's look at time. Let's look at where that's spent.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're dead right. Yeah, completely. And you know, for me, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm particularly great at many things, Rob, but one thing I do and always have done is reflect. Probably reflect too much, but I reflect on everything, everywhere, every day. So for me, you know, that reflection piece is just massively important, to really think about every experience you've had and how it's going to either change you, your behavior, change things around you. Because you know, for me, learning is always about change. Otherwise, what's the point? So it's changing something, how we think about something, how we do something, how we lead something. And I think that you can do that without reflecting and properly thinking about it. It's very rare, I think, you suddenly hear a piece of information or learn something and just go, oh, well, that's it then. I know exactly everything. I can do this. It's the bit afterwards where you sit and think, right, okay, hang on a minute. How does this work then? Practically, how am I going to go and do this? What does that mean for me? So yeah, that's really important.
I always talk about it being like a sat nav. It's all very well knowing programming your destination, but if you don't know where you are at this moment, how the hell are you going to plan a route? Like, sat nav broken, computer says no, I don't know how I'm going to get there. Well, yeah, that reflection piece, unless you actually spend the time to go, where are we at this moment? What have we tried? What have we not tried? What might we want to do? What might we want to achieve? How good am I at it? What do I need to learn to be able to get better at it? And that reflection piece is very much, I know we were chatting before we started recording about Charles Jennings and 70-20-10 and all that sort of stuff, and that very much kind of reflects his talks about the flipped classroom, about, you know, the classroom isn't so much about the training at the start, the process. It's actually the learn all this stuff as you're going along and build all this social learning around it, and then get back in the classroom at the end to actually
Yeah.
talk about what you've all learned and share it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because you
definitely.
could all have learned 10 different things massively in the last month, and then you bring all that together, wait, you've just all learned 100 things. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, quite. Yeah. No, it can be really impactful.
So you mentioned ROI then. So I guess, from your point of view in the program, you've kind of talked about where you're edging to with that.
Mm.
But from an L&D point of view, then, best practice, I guess it's going to be difficult to individualize it at the start, is to go,
Mm.
how should we be doing that better? So we're in a position where we're kind of marketing our services better. How do we have that impact? How do we measure the impact, the value, the ROI, whatever we want to call it? So it gets to that higher level, not the bums on seats, like you said before,
Mm.
to kind of go, this team is indispensable.
Yeah, and look, I mean, gosh, I wish I could answer that really succinctly. I think if anybody could and bottle it, then they'd probably make a fortune.
Yeah.
And in a way that's, easy and practical for people to take note and go and do it. That's something we've talked about in our industry for donkey's years now. And I think there's probably a bit of an obsession for me around ROI in our industry. And I'm not suggesting that we suddenly don't keep trying to demonstrate that, but I think it is very hard. It depends on the type of learning that you're talking about. Some things are clearly harder than others, but there are just other ways. And I think ultimately measuring change is really important to me. So any level of change. So what changes have happened as a result of this learning intervention? More importantly, connect that change to business impact. So how has that helped the business either move faster, become more profitable, become more high performing? How are you measuring that? So if it's a leadership development program, it's going to be very different to if it's I don't know, an IT skills program. But you can do it. Take the time. Okay, well, actually, the fact that people can do this now, I don't know, an hour quicker than they used to be able to do it, that means this. That means our productivity is this. That means there's an impact. And I think we just probably get it's not lazy, because let's be honest, L&D are generally really busy all the time. There's so much to do. Generally, the team isn't big enough to support the organization, so it's not really about being lazy, but it is a job in its own right, I think, for one person. Just like I feel marketing learning should be a job in the L&D team. Someone should be responsible for or accountable for the whole engagement and marketing piece of learning. Equally, somebody really needs to be there for demonstrating impact and value. And a lot of that as well, we underplay, I think, the value of return on expectations as well. So I think when you're talking to stakeholders, senior business leaders, at the beginning of any kind of embarking on any kind of learning intervention, you need to understand why you're doing it. So you'd have those conversations with them, but surely at that point, that's a great time for us to say, okay, well, in a year's time, in 6 months' time, whatever it is, what does good look like? What are we aiming for here? Let's work it through. What are the ultimate expectations for this? And going back and being able to measure that is just as valuable as being able to come up with, the ROI on something, I think.
Yeah, massively. And there's a lot here. I mean, I've talked about it a lot, and I've talked about it a lot with you in the past. L&D ROI. I think there's a lot there about really kind of gatekeeping the real responsibilities and accountabilities within each area of what we're trying to achieve. What is the big picture? What's the thing we're trying to actually get better, or the change we're trying to make? And who's responsible for what in each stage of that?
Yeah.
My mind kind of goes to, if I'm working for Screwfix and I provide you with the hammer, if you go and make a mess of the job, to what degree is Screwfix culpable of that? If that hammer met your expectations of what a hammer should do,
Yeah.
and that's what you
Yeah.
ordered, then
Yeah.
Screwfix, they've nailed their ROI. They did everything they could to contribute towards that.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of way, you think, from a learning development point of view, is that you can do the best thing in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have a positive impact on the stats, because there are so many other factors that come down into any one. You mentioned earlier on going to C-suite and giving them the stats that they actually care about, that they focus on day in, day out. There are so many variables, and those figures will go up and down all the time, even if you don't have an L&D team.
Absolutely.
So how do we actually laser focus on what the role and responsibility is of an L&D team when contributing to those things?
Yeah, and actually it's you know, and when you're having those kind of conversations with stakeholders up front, I think it's just as important to agree what's out of scope as what's in scope. And that's often missed. And you kind of go, oh, well, if it wasn't covered in scope, it's obvious it's out of scope. No. We have to be really explicit. What is out of scope? This will help massively, you know, later on down the line. And actually it helps up front as well, because if you can identify and share that something is out of scope and the reason for that, you're also helping to set expectations, I think, which, you know, is crucially important. But I do think we are moving away from this, but sometimes this still happens where you get a kind of request from the business and it just comes into L&D and there's little challenge from L&D function and something's just created and it's delivered. To me, that is more than likely a complete and utter waste of time, money, and resources. You know, unless you've properly understood why something's needed, what changes it you're looking for, what is the impact it's going to have, and then you've actually reviewed that during and at the end. That, I mean, what is the point if you can't measure it and you actually don't know if it's actually going to add any value at all? When we've got such finite resource to use, I think we just need to be really careful, and that business alignment piece is so important. It's important from the beginning with, you know, identifying your strategy, even writing a strategy, but it's really important as well. I was going to say at the end, but equally at the beginning with evaluation, because obviously we should always start with that. So yeah, I think that the closer you are to business and how the business runs and what the business wants to deliver, the better and the more successful you're going to be as an L&D function.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that part of my backstory as to what I do nowadays is the amount of restructures I went through in various L&D teams, and without kind of boring those who've heard it before, roughly half of those restructures I went through led to promotion opportunities, brilliant, and roughly half of those led to redundancies. And I guess, you know, if they'd all been redundancies, I'd have probably gone, I might be part of the problem here. Doesn't mean I'm not still. But equally, if they all been promotions, I might not have had as much passion to want to change this because I've always come out okay with it. But there was always that sort of thing, you know, there's no smoke without fire. What are we doing that's kind of contributing to this or could help navigate around this a little bit? And I've always had this picture of kind of the senior leadership team in a room needing to cut costs and going, well, what's expendable?
Yep.
And in that moment, it probably doesn't matter all the stats we've managed to produce. It's never really mattered because ultimately we need the product and we need to sell it and we need to support it. Let's cut that bit there. Whereas I think equally powerful is that point if that, and I think it's crucial what you said, return on expectations, is if those leaders are in that room and are going, we wouldn't have been able to do what we do now without the support of that team. I couldn't have achieved those sales figures had it not been for the support of that team. And I do actually think that they get that support at the minute. Probably not as well as we could be doing it. And we ourselves might get distracted on other things that maybe aren't as bigger priorities because we're so busy and we're having to make those judgment calls all the time. So there's more we can do, but it's never really focused on or laser focused how we've contributed to that. And you know, I guess, you know, order takers is the term that goes around quite a lot when it comes to L&D. That's sitting down and going, okay, well, what's the actual thing we're trying to tackle here? We want customer satisfaction to go up, or we want adherence to a system to go up. Brilliant. And actually ask that question, that kind of coach approach of, well, you tell me, what are all the things that contribute to that stat?
Yeah,
you know, list as many things as we can. What's all the things that can make it go up? What are all the things that can make it go down? List as much as you can, and then kind of go from an L&D perspective. Okay, which of those things are we going to be responsible for? And the good news about that is very few of them, because we're not in that business. We're in this business. Manage it like your own business. But then the best question I love to ask then is brilliant. So there's all your answers. How can we help you with those?
Yeah.
How do we help you manage all those different variables? Because there's always, you know, you've been around the block loads of times when it comes to L&D. The amount of answers that come out then about it's the systems don't allow it, the leadership's not that great, where the communication's really bad. Great. So if I go and put on this training course, guess what? Your communication will still be bad. Your system will still be rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I've worked in many organizations. I'm sure lots of people have that over the past years have introduced, I don't know, some sort of enterprise social network, Facebook for Business, Yammer, whatever. And when you ask, well, why have we just implemented this? Well, because we want people to be more collaborative. Right. Collaboration is a behavior, and you've just implemented a tool. So yes, granted, it may help you collaborate more, but if you're not a collaborative organization, guess what? Having a tool isn't going to suddenly make you collaborative. In fact, it'll be seen as, oh God, it's another thing I've got to log into. And it's not what we've been into the DNA. And with learning, I think generally for me, and this is why it's such an important topic for us to cover, it's actually, you've got to focus on the foundations in an organization. And that should be your biggest concern as an L&D director, chief learning officer. It should be, are the foundations in place? So is this a great learning environment in this organization? Is it psychologically safe? Can people make mistakes? Can they really muck up without fear of being fired on the spot? Can they learn then from those mistakes? Do they get chance and opportunity to reflect? Are their managers reinforcing that and helping them to develop and grow? That whole environment is massive. And equally, do they have, I suppose, a learning mindset, for want of another word, but do they know how to learn? Can they take on information and learn from everything that happens to them in every experience? And then, frankly, until you've got that at your foundation, it's kind of pointless throwing other things on top of it, because it's only gonna stick with a few people. But if you get those foundations right, you increase your percentage of the number of people in the organization that learning does stick with, and that's when you can create a high performing organization.
Yeah, I love that. It's that scenario that pans out, that we do it really, really quickly, and some people get it the way that we've tried to push it out, and then that just reinforces the problem. Well, they get it. Why haven't you got it?
Yeah.
Or because they can sit down and absorb a 2-hour e-learning and then bang, remember it, and away they go. But also that collaboration piece, you were spot on. I was just thinking about organizations again that I've worked in, and they've introduced things like Slack and Yammer and blah 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 and all these things, and they then become part of the problem. And that's not just me saying that, that's what people are shouting out. The problem is there are now too many tools, whereas the actual problem was that no one on the second floor ever went to speak to anyone on the third floor. That was the thing. When we all went to lunch, there was the table of people there, and there was that table of people there. Going back, just thinking about going back to the sort of early 2000s England football team that everyone harks on about being collectively a nightmare, that all the United players would sit at one table and all the Arsenal players on another and Liverpool on another, never talk to each other. That was the problem. The solution to that scenario wouldn't have been to give them Slack or give them Teams. It was a leadership piece there that the person in charge at that point didn't care about.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. And there's a lot of things that might be implemented, that you see from an IT perspective as well, like a new system or whatever, and that suddenly something just appears, and on your desktop there's something there. I mean, that's really the equivalent of learning without marketing any initiative. It's like all of a sudden you've got an invitation for a leadership development program, and you're like, what? Wait, what's this about? Yeah, that's not how we do things, So it's it is difficult. I think with the environment, though, generally in the organization, for me, it's really important to make sure that you've got that as a foundation before you put anything else on top of it, really. I mean, we've obviously talked about really important stuff like business alignment and evaluation, all of that really important. But again, it can only really go so far, because if you're, let's say, for example, you want to create a more innovative leadership team or an innovative workforce. So we're really focusing on the skill of innovation, right? I want everybody to be way more innovative by the end of the year. Fantastic. Part of the innovation process is being able to make frequent mistakes and learn from them. So if you're in an environment that punishes people for doing things wrong, that innovation training is not going to stick. It might stick with 5 to 10% of people that maybe, I don't know, don't care if they make mistakes, and don't care about the consequences of that. But for the majority of us, we mold into the culture that's in the organization. If we know that getting something wrong means we're going to get told off, or it's going to result in something bad, then we're not going to try new things. And so therefore you are never going to create an innovative workforce. So for me, that environment piece is probably one of the most foundational and most important, actually, before we do anything else.
It boils back down to the kind of culture of the organization, giving people the permission to. Yeah, there's the safety, but also part of that is that kind of express permission to go out and innovate. If you look at companies which I know you'll have seen and looked at before, like looks at Google doing its 80-20 and giving 20% of the time for people to work on whatever problem they see fit. If you just go, right, you've got your day job and I want you to try and think of any other stuff that you think needs to be fixed. When it comes to prioritization, people are going to go, I need to focus on the stack of jobs that we've got in the list. They don't go and do anything with those thoughts or innovative ideas that they want to come up with, those creative juices flowing. Or if they do, then the other person's working on their to-do list and they can't help them or support them. So it just stops in the sand and they kind of carry on. Whereas being able to just put that and say, no, you're all using this time to try and solve problems that we've not even thought of yet, things that are getting in your way.
Yeah.
And that's the point where you kind of test the organization. We go, oh, no, we've not got time to do that. We can't give people the freedom and time to actually block out some of it to think about this innovation. When exactly are you wanting to use that skill then?
You are dead right. Yeah, you're dead right. And it's kind of like with L&D, I think there's the kind of happening now stuff which takes over pretty much everything you do in the function. But you've also got to keep literally one eye on what's coming in the next 3 to 5 years so we can be better prepared for it and better planned. It can't all just be firefighting and in the moment stuff. So, and that's where I think the more kind of strategic thinking comes in as well. But it's important for the whole L&D team, not just the head of learning, to be thinking, well, what's next? What's coming? How do we kind of support the business in stuff that we don't even know they're going to need yet? And that bit's just as important, actually.
So there's a lot there. There's a lot in there then around the kind of like the prioritization that L&D look at. So I guess, in your mind, if I'm a senior learning figure, other than signing up to your program, obviously, what should be my priority? What are the priorities that I should be focusing on, other than signing on the dotted line with CLO100?
Yeah.
Dear Cathy.
Ultimately, is the answer, Rob, clearly. Yeah, look, I mean, and I think the areas, program or no program, I still feel that the areas that we're covering are really important, and these are super important to me, and I think they make the most impact in a business. So the first is business alignment. So we need to make sure that we are completely and utterly aligned to the direction of the organization and everything that entails. So think about upskilling yourself in terms of commercial awareness, in terms of how the business really runs. It's okay to put your hand up and say, do you know what, I don't think I really know. Go and spend time with different leaders in the organization, really understand how the business runs, because at that executive level you need to know more than just about learning. You have got to know about how the business works. Look at your kind of strategic skills within that as well. So I think business alignment, absolutely. I think developing those foundations, so things like making sure that the organization have a growth and learning mindset. So really look at what's stopping that. What are the blockers for people learning? Creating the right environment so that actually, it is a safe environment to learn, but also it's conducive of learning. It encourages learning. So it's not just that learning's okay and you can do it. It's actually, it's encouraged. It's part of the organization's DNA. I think that's massive. Capability, but by capability, there's obviously the current capability building that we need to do, but for me, it's looking to the future. So, things that we'll look at are mega trends and their impact on society and organization. So what are the massive things that are going to be changing in society over the next 3 to 5 years? What's the impact of those on organizations? And then what does that mean for the skills or capability gap for us in the organization that the L&D can contribute to? So I think the capability piece and the kind of future focus there is massive. The fifth one is probably marketing learning, engaging learners. My God, this is huge. We have really actually got to get people in the right mindset for learning. We've got them to get them to want to learn. We've also got to raise the brand profile of L&D. And actually at your level, at a L&D director level, you need to be thinking about your own personal brand as well. So what are you doing in that space? Are you doing talks, seminars? Are you blogging? Do you have a podcast? What are you doing to be known as well? Because you have to think about your own career and your next move. And then the last one for me, which I do think is important, and I think some people could see as a nice to have, but it's bigger than that for me, which is innovation in learning. And it's where's learning going? Let's stay ahead of the trend. Let's not be the last person to be talking about ChatGPT. Let's be first talking about that, but not just, oh, that'll be nice. Let's get some VR headsets in. actually, what is this innovation in learning going to do for the business? Does it mean people are going to learn quicker? Does it mean we can absorb it more into their day-to-day jobs? How is it going to help people? So really staying abreast, I think, of what learning interventions and innovations and technologies are around the corner.
Yeah, I mean that's I've just been scribbling down as you've been talking there. I mean that list is not only a great kind of tease for what learning leaders can have when they come onto the program, but I also think that it's a really proactive list of things for anyone involved in L&D. Well, anyone involved in the entire organization to a degree. But if I focus on kind of leaders and L&D leaders specifically for a second, if you're just joining L&D for the first time, if you're working in design, if you're a trainer, whatever it might be, looking at all those things, how does the work that you currently do, how does that align to the business? How are you developing foundations? How are you creating the right environment? And so on and so on. All those things that you've talked about. And I guess, we before this call, we were chatting a little bit about the 7 Habits, Stephen Covey, and all the kind of classic stuff, and going, all that stuff is really expanding your circle of influence there. If you're doing all of that stuff, but equally, when you know that that's where you want to be, you want to end up being the leader or the director or whatever it might be of that L&D function, knowing where you are with all those things and saying, right, what I'm going to need when I get into that role is I need more exposure to this, or I need some support with that,
Yeah.
and I need to understand this, as opposed to getting maybe 3 months into it and going, uh-oh, I don't know any of that, and now I daren't say.
Yeah, well, yeah, because then it's awkward, isn't it? You're like, oh God, I've left it too long. I should have known. And actually the first thing I always do when joining an organization, or what I used to do in the past, was literally the first 3 months, the only thing I wanted to do was get to know the business. So you go and spend time, you might even shadow people, you just learn their jobs, understand really important roles in the organization, spend time with stakeholders, get to understand, okay, so what do legal do? What are they covering us for? Why is that important? Is that really crucial in this business? Finance, go and spend time with them. How do they work budgets out? So I need to know the difference between CapEx and OpEx, and actually, how do they run learning and development budgets in this organization? I best know that quickly. Spend time with as many people as you can, but not just at the exec level, really understanding every level in the organization. So then you've got your own knowledge of the business, plus you layer that with your knowledge of learning. And you're in an amazing position, and I think that sets any L&D leader up for future success, whether they stay in learning or they move on to be a leader in a different space.
What I particularly love about what you've just been talking about there is that it almost, even though you're a learning leader, it starts off with just taking yourself out of that mindset and just going into the business. So many times I've seen, this is learning leaders, this is business partners, consultants, designers, whoever it might be. We tend to go in and kind of go, oh, well, what are the biggest learning challenges you have? What could we as a learning team do more of with you? Would you like to see out the courses we could do? Are you aware of our skills and whatever it might be? Take the learning out of it and just kind of go, what are your biggest challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I was L&D director at Soho House, one of the first things I did was, and Soho House is a great company to do this in, I might just add. But you go around all the different houses and you get to know the local teams and you learn to make cocktails and you understand, why that's popular with that customer group in that space.
How do I get a job there then, Cathy?
Yeah.
Do you get to drink them as well?
Yeah. But it does then become part of you, and everything you think about and everything you do, you're taking it back to, oh, John at the bar, or you're taking it back to Peter in housekeeping, or Melanie in HR, or whatever, and you're constantly just thinking about them and how does that impact them, and what's in it for me message for them, because we've created this great thing, but actually, before we market it, we really need to make sure that we're going to hit everybody in the right place. It's going to be really impactful for them, so they kind of go, oh, this is a no-brainer, I need to be part of this. And I do think that's absolutely vital, and then again, that's why the onboarding is so important for me for this program. It's getting to know our customers' organizations, so it's just a slightly different way around, but actually it's just as important. I need to know what your organization is, what your organizational challenges are, the direction of your business, because that helps me to help you better implement the changes from what you're going to learn over the year.
And it helps people build their own case studies of their own organization then as well, because we've done it in this conversation. Even we talk probably more me than you, but we got CocaCola, Google, and all these sort of things, and there's only so much of that you can do, because there's always that challenge. Well, that's them. Look at Google, they've got all the money under the sun. They can let people have a day just to work on what they want and all that sort of stuff. But the more you start actually understanding the business, understanding the challenges, and start seeing successes in there, you can bring that into your content, your e-learning, your conversations. You know, it isn't Google have tried this and it's worked. It's such and such in finance has tried this, and look at the impact it's had.
Definitely. Yeah. No, that case studies is a brilliant way to do it, actually. And also just linking back to the whole marketing your own personal brand, you know, and putting yourself out there to be able to share that outside of your company as well and go, look what we've been doing. You could enter awards, you could use it to then craft a presentation, an event. It's really helpful, all of that stuff. And I think even preparing you for your next role to be able to say, well, look, actually, rather than me giving you my CV, why don't I show you a few case studies of what I've really achieved in my organization?
100%.
That's a really big thing.
100%. Brilliant stuff. We've got to that part where we need to look back at all the things we've spoken about. That's why I've been scribbling a few notes here and there and going, based on everything we've been chatting, what would be a good title for this episode?
Oh, gosh, now you're asking.
Loads of stuff we've talked about there. But
yeah. I don't know. I suppose it's kind of been more about the role of the head of learning or the CLO, the fact that it maybe needs to evolve a bit and change, grow. Something about investing in your own development there, isn't there? I know.
It's a big title.
No, that's a really big title, nice and catchy. Maybe the evolving role of the CLO.
The evolving role of the CLO. I'm just looking at the list of things you sent me that you started to chat out as well. Some of those, creating the right environment being kind of key to things.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah,
and creating a right environment or learning environment or whatever it might be. But I think that seemed to me, all the other things. You're developing foundations and creating the right environment. They seem to be, unless you do that stuff.
Yeah. True.
What's the point in trying to do the other stuff?
For learning. Yeah, like that.
Sorted. Yeah. We're there. We're sorted. The program then, if people would love to hear more about that, take a look at it, forward it on to each other, sign up to it, all those sort of great things, where's the best way they can see more from you, look at that?
So a couple of ways. I mean, you can search CLO100. That should take you to our website, which is clo100.co.uk. And on there, you can download the syllabus. Or if you're already thinking, my God, I absolutely know I want to be part of this, you can also apply as well directly there. Otherwise, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then we've also got the business page on LinkedIn at CLO100 as well.
Awesome stuff. And for those listening, I will put that link into the show notes as well, so you can be able to click on that and go straight to it. So you don't even need to wear out your fingers typing it. It'll all be there for you. Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much for that conversation, Cathy. I've really enjoyed it. I think there's lots of value in there for just people just to gain that. One of my mantras is mindset first. And just to start thinking a little bit differently about learning and how we lead learning in an organization, but also what it means to be a leader of learning, rather than just going, here's the toolkit you're going to need to be a learning leader, and here's the skill set you're going to need to be a learning leader. Go and do it, and then realize the context 6 months later and have a nervous breakdown. Actually start thinking about it now, and to some people that might actually go, all right, I don't want that, and that's cool. But at least you realize 6 months before you're going to do it, rather than 6 months already into it. And for some people, it might just, as these sort of things did for me, it might just completely take such a weight off your shoulders and go, yeah, maybe I don't have to have all those answers then. I actually can go around and find answers and build this thing collaboratively with the rest of the business. It's not just on me.
Yeah, totally.
So I loved it. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day, and I will speak to you very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, Rob. Cheers.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. And that's it for this episode of the Leadership Untitled podcast. This episode is called Creating the Right Environment for Learning, and has been with me, Rob Moores, and Cathy Hoy. My thanks again go out to Cathy for coming on today and having a fantastic conversation with me, as it does, as always, to you guys, the listeners, for tuning in, downloading, following, and whatever else is you may be doing out there. Please, if you've not done so already, subscribe to the podcast. You'll find us in multiple locations. Give us a like, give us a mention, give us a share, and hopefully you've got plenty from it. Until next time, see you now.